I am Robbin Miller, host of Miller Chat. My guest today is Karen Fine, DVM, Doctor of Veterinarian Medicine, and author of her book, The Other Family Doctor, a New York Times bestseller. Welcome to my show tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know you've been very busy, and I'm very grateful that you were able to come tonight and talk about your book and a little bit about yourself to our
Yeah,
viewers.
thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and what led you to write your book?
Yeah, I'm a veterinarian. I do small animal medicine, so dogs and cats. Very rarely other small creatures, but or larger creatures, but for the most part, it's dogs and cats. And for years and years, I feel like I've seen a lot of human suffering as well as sometimes animal suffering. And the human suffering is especially around issues when people's animals are sick or at the end of their lives and people are thinking about euthanasia and really, feeling a bit overwhelmed about how to make the decision, when to make the decision. And I think people often feel alone in that space because there's not a lot of kind of context for that in the outer world. So I see, of course, the similar situations over and over, but a lot of people are not really familiar with that. So I kind of had it in my head for a long time to write a book addressing that. And then when I was younger, so this was in about 2005, 2004, 2005, my dog, who was only 4, she was born in 2000, she was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. And she lived until 2005, but she was my heart dog. And so that was really devastating for me, even though she lived longer than she was supposed to. So I kind of had the idea to combine those two things and talk about it through a memoir, by sort of sharing my own story and saying, this is what happened to me, and this is how deeply I grieved and how I felt this loss even before it happened, which I think is also a very common thing. It's called anticipatory grief. Whether the animal's young or whether the animal's old, I see many, many people that get choked up just thinking about their animal dying, even if there's no reason to think it's going to happen anytime in the near future. Or the animal gets like one gray hair or something like that. So
Yeah.
I really wrote the book to, sort of for, to kind of send a message. And I also did house calls in the central Massachusetts area for 25 years, basically until COVID. That's when I stopped. And so that really gave me an intimate portrait of the lives of my patients and their families. So that was part of the reason for the title, The Other Family Doctors, that the animals are other family members. And also I feel that veterinarians are really sort of the doctor for the whole family. That was just a groan, and that was my dog Toffee lying down. She just did one of those dog sighs, if that came across.
Well, I'm so glad you wrote the book because um, I think it's probably one of the first times I read it from your perspective. I mean, you were writing it from lived experience. It's not like a theory. You're not basing it on a theory. You basically got your hands dirty. You wrote it from the grassroots. You've been there, done that, and you were able to relate to the people that you saw. You had that one-on-one contact.
Right, and I wanted to share some of those funny, sweet animal stories, but I also wanted it to be more than sort of chicken soup for the soul kind of things. I
Hmm.
wanted to really delve into the euthanasia process, and I also wanted to share what it does, sort of what it's like to be a veterinarian, a day in the life, because there's a lot of things that we in the profession don't even share amongst ourselves, and things that I didn't even admit to myself, how difficult I found some of these situations and how I'd be up at night. And come to find out, that's actually a pretty common thing in my profession. A lot of doctors are up at night thinking about, did I do the right thing? Could I have done something? Should I have said something else? And we're in very, unique situations. I think the human medical profession is not in the business of euthanizing patients and talking to families about making a euthanasia decision. So it's a very final decision, and every situation is unique. There's no there's no copycat situation. It's really, I feel that you really have to be, treat every situation as an individual occurrence.
Yes, and I love the story how you became a doctor. I think you said your grandfather was a medical doctor, right, in South Africa?
Yeah. My grandfather was a medical doctor in South Africa. He was a
Mhm.
general practitioner. He treated people from, babies to the elderly. And I have his doctor bag, and I used it when I did house calls for many
Mm.
years until I got a shoulder problem and started using a backpack.
Mhm.
But yeah, I really got the idea of doing house calls from him because he had an office in his home, or actually, I think he had an office. Um, Outside of his home as well, but he had sort of a room in his home that he would see patients, but he had an office as well. But he would often go to the patients' homes. And when people came to the office, he knew what their house was like. He knew
Mhm.
them from that, they weren't just a number to him. He knew them as individuals.
Well, I think that's important in the relationship, and I think that's what you stress in your book, that you got to know the people that you saw. Yes, they were your clients and or patients, but they were human beings.
Yeah, very much
And you
so.
and you very much related to that because a lot of, you know, some people don't see it that way. I see it that way because I'm a counselor. We're all human beings and animals. So you were able to be more personable with them.
Yes, when you're sitting at someone's kitchen table or in their living room or their family room, it's a whole different thing than being in the office with them.
Of course. I like the fact where you had to put the cat in the bathroom sometimes. I think I read that. They'll find any hole that they can get.
Absolutely, and cats are really smart. So I had a lot of cat patients that every year I came, they got more difficult because they were like, "Oh, it's her." People say,
Yeah, but
"Do they remember?" But boy, especially cats, they remembered. And I had two people over the years tell me their cats heard my voice on the answering machine and ran and hid.
well, I don't know any animals that loves going to the vet or seeing a vet. Um, Maybe there are some that love it.
There are some, believe it or not, but I
Right.
always appreciate them, even if they're like the really exuberant dogs that will knock you over with happiness. I'm like, "Oh my
Hmm.
goodness, they're glad to see me."
Some of the things you talk about, I mean, you talk a lot about euthanasia. You even talk about the process, which I've never read before. Can you tell a little bit about that? Not to gross anybody out, but you actually got into the nitty details about what you actually do when you euthanize. How was that writing for you when you wrote that?
I feel that it probably is mysterious to a lot of people, and I
Um,
wanted to sort of clear up that mystery so that, because basically, if you love a dog or a cat, you're probably going to be in that situation. And I thought, I'd like for people to maybe be a little prepared ahead of time, or maybe, they've been through it, but they were just really emotional or traumatized. And so I wanted to kind of really gently walk people through the process
mm,
because I feel like it's such an important thing that people may not know or understand. And I always ask people, and some people are like, "Yeah, I've been through it many times," and some people say no, and then that clues me in that they want me to kind of walk them through it before it happens. But yeah, I wanted to kind of demystify that for people, and it really is, by far most of the time, it's a very
yeah,
peaceful
hmm.
ending.
Of course.
It's not something brutal or inhumane. We try very hard to make it as peaceful as possible and as good experience as possible for the human family and the animal, of course.
Oh yeah, and you wrote it really well. It's like you did it very gently. I sensed that because I mean,
Thanks.
yes,
That
you
was my
had.
goal.
Yeah, you wrote it like in a I mean, I guess in accounts I could read into it, but I felt it was very gentle and soft and understanding what
Mhm.
somebody else may be feeling because when you have to euthanize a pet, you're just beside yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm the same way. And so,
Of course.
everyone
I
I
would
know
too.
is the same way. So people will apologize for crying. And I
Yes,
always say,
yes.
oh, of course it's okay when it's my animal, and not that I don't shed tears when it's someone else's animal, because I often do, but when it's my animal, of course it's very, very difficult. And I don't think people should apologize for crying. And we're very used to it.
Ever. And then, the thing is, you bring to light that we are not a death talking society.
Right, right.
And I appreciate you writing about, because when I taught death and dying, and I worked with I taught the students, we in American society is, even after COVID, we still don't want to talk about it.
Right, right. I know there's a movement, there's death
Hmm.
cafes and the death
Yes.
positive movement, and there
Yes,
there are
yes.
some, but that's not really the mainstream.
Right.
So, yeah, it's difficult. And I did encounter some resistance in terms of finding a literary agent, in terms of, well, why would anyone want to buy a book on, animals dying and your dog who dies, so
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, why would anybody take a death and dying class? Well, it's an elective. But it is so well needed for, especially for healthcare professionals too. But I'm glad
it
that you
so is.
it is,
Yeah.
but and actually they're not teaching it anymore because they have a lack of enrollment, believe it or not. So it's no longer.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
took a death and dying. I think we did. So when I was in college, we were required to take like a sociology class. And I
Right.
think what we did was a unit on death and dying. And it was incredible. And I learned about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Mhm.
and the stages, which are really, sort of phases that go in and out. But I learned about that. And I remember learning about that, and learning that in the, before she started really speaking up about things, if someone had a terminal diagnosis, a
Mhm.
person, they wouldn't tell the person, they would tell the
Right.
family. But
Yes.
the medical profession thought it was not good to tell the person. And I just couldn't believe that when I learned it.
Why they don't tell the thing is, why they don't tell the person, it's interesting how the animal already knows.
Yes, I feel like
Yep.
I've seen that over and over
Yep.
again. The
They
animal
know.
knows, and they're not afraid. And I feel
No,
that
they're
there's
not.
a lot we can learn from animals. There's a big conversation to be had, I think, about
Mhm.
how we can learn from animals, that they accept their death. They know their body's breaking down, and
Mhm.
they understand, they know what to do.
Yeah. So bringing that to light, in your book, you touched a little bit on children and grief. How do you how do you deal with children in that process? If they are with the owner, do you encourage people to bring children like over 8 or leave them home? Because again, that also affects children, but maybe in a different way, I would say based on what you see.
It's a very individual decision, and I think some adults do not want to be present during euthanasia, and there's a bit of a disagreement about that. I think,
Mhm.
to me, if someone's uncomfortable, I think it's fine if they're not there. I don't think they should feel guilty about that. They're feeling bad enough.
Mhm.
Their animal is in safe, loving hands. And they don't need to feel guilty, I think. Other people feel like, well, really people should be present, but I'm not in that camp. In terms of children, there is that possibility that the procedure doesn't go well. And by not going well, I mean it's possible, that it's maybe a little bit. There's several possibilities. It could be a little drawn out. You
Mm.
don't get the solution into the vein. Um, you have to go to another vein, and potentially another vein, or
Right, right.
something else. And then, there's also the potential that the animal will look like they're gasping for breath, or will vocalize and moan. So it's something that I think for children, I think people should think about, what would that worst case scenario be like, and could my child handle that? And by
Mhm.
far the majority of the time, everything goes smoothly,
Mhm.
but there's just not a guarantee. So I think, and every veterinarian has had situations that are euthanasias that didn't go well. Excuse me.
Excuse me.
And
And
it's difficult for us, it's difficult for the family. So with a young child, I think that could be potentially an issue. And with an older child, I think if they want to be there and they're prepared, then I think that that's fine. And I think, where I practice, it's not that common for younger children to be there. I have a
Mhm.
friend who practices in rural Maine. And she, I remember having this conversation with her one time, and she said, "Oh, it's very common for me that the whole family is there." So it might depend on what part of the country you're in as well.
Mhm. Of course. And, besides talking about euthanasia and pet loss, you also were able to get the point across that veterans are human beings too. You
Yeah,
humanize
and
them.
we're really having kind of a crisis,
Mm,
and it's getting, worse, I would say, since COVID because there's not that many of us. There's a veterinary shortage, and a lot of people put us under a lot of pressure. And when I say us, I don't mean just the veterinarians, I mean the support staff, including receptionists, and some of them have a really difficult time. And now that there's a shortage of veterinarians and so many people got animals over COVID, so there's been a increase in pets, a decrease in veterinarians, and everybody is booked up. So you're much more likely now to be told if you call and you say, "Well, my dog is limping. Can I come in today?" There's a few of those appointments that have been saved, but once you get to those appointments are filled and then you squeeze a couple people in where they really shouldn't
mm,
be squeezed in, then people are told, well, you need to go to an urgent care clinic or an emergency veterinarian. And people want to see the same doctor. They don't want to do that. They know it might
mm,
cost them more for the urgent care. And people understandably don't want to do that. But we really don't have any choice. We need to go home at some point. We have to have
right.
boundaries. And that's why we have these resources now. There's starting to be urgent care clinics
Mhm.
and there's more emergency care facilities. Some of them are sometimes overwhelmed and on what's called deferment,
Right.
even toughs. And it's sometimes they don't have the staff. Sometimes it's that they don't have the space for the animals. There's
Mhm.
literally no more cages, no more runs, no more space for sick animals. And this is completely a COVID thing. I'd never heard of
Mm.
this happening before COVID. But people's tempers are short, and unfortunately, the receptionists bear a lot of the brunt. When you're telling someone, "No, I'm sorry, we can't see you
I
today
know. I
or
know.
tomorrow," and I know your animal's limping and uncomfortable, you're going to have to go elsewhere and wait to be triaged or whatever. And then the receptionists get told things like, "Well, you don't care about animals."
Oh.
And that's not even getting into like the price of things. We might
Mhm.
say, "Oh, okay, your animal's limping. Well, this is how much it'll be for X-rays, or we need to do blood work, or whatever." And then people say, "Well, I can't afford that. What do I do?" So a lot of times it's taken out on the veterinarians and staff in terms of, well, you people only care about money, which of course is the farthest thing from the truth. But
Right,
the
right.
only thing that's really, quote, not really free, but the physical exam, everything else really costs money. And even the exam, you got to pay the receptionist salary, the doctor's
Mhm.
salary, technician's salary, you've got to pay the electricity,
Right.
the whatever. There's costs. I mean, every once in a while you can comp something like that, every once in a while,
Mhm.
but really can't. These are costs. There's the pharmaceutical
Of course.
industry and the labs who do the blood work. So, and the digital x-ray equipment is
Mhm.
tens of thousands of dollars, so it's very expensive to operate a veterinary clinic.
I can imagine. Well, you definitely do great work under the such conditions that you're under, definitely of that, and it's good that you showed the human side to vets.
Thank you. And I really wanted to because I think it's a problem within the profession. There's a
Mhm.
problem with suicide in the profession. And I think we're sort of trained to be perfectionists and
Mhm.
kind of selected to be perfectionists. And
Mm.
so nobody wants to admit that they're struggling. So that's a really difficult thing. And it really helped me think about difficult times that I've had and put it in perspective that, wow, I bet other people feel the same way. And I've never had a suicidal tendency, but if somebody has and they're having a bad day or a bad month or whatever, it's a problem in the profession. And I think part of it is, maybe people's expectations. So, every day or week we hear from people that are incensed that we can't fit them in, but it's just, I think hopefully people are learning this is the new normal and we can't really do anything about it until we maybe have more veterinarians graduating.
I hope that you do. I think that definitely is. We only have about 8 minutes left. Did you want to share one story, maybe of your dog or somebody you
Sure.
working with?
There's one story that I tell in the book, and I just, this is one of my favorite stories. I had a patient named Peanut, a little dog who was a Shih Tzu, and he loved me. He just loved me, even though I had to squeeze his anal glands just about every time I saw him. And his owner was lovely, and she would always give me a hug, and I would park my
Oh.
car, and they lived in a second floor apartment, and the stairs were outside, so I'd sort of walk up the outside steps, and Peanut would be like doing his little dance. And so I'd been there many times and I kind of had my regular seat at the kitchen table. So we sort of had a routine. And one day his owner called me and she said, I'm really worried about him because he's urinating off of his newspapers. And
Mm,
he's never done this before. And I'm worried maybe he has a urinary tract infection. Can you come see him? So I said, sure. So probably the next day or whenever I could come, I come to her house, and it was this time of year. It was like
mm,
beginning of December, and that's also why I wanted to tell this story now. So I go into her apartment, and it looks different, and everyone had, it was Christmas time,
mhm,
so she had decorated for Christmas, and this was something I really realized when I started going into people's homes because I'm Jewish and I grew up Jewish, and I didn't realize the extent to that many people decorate for Christmas. It wasn't
mm,
just a
yes.
tree. There were,
Mm,
decorations everywhere.
yep,
And so,
definitely.
yeah, so this dog was used to urinating on newspapers that she
Oh,
would put down in the middle of the floor of this little sort of foyer area where
mhm,
the door to the deck would open, and there was this little foyer area. That's where his newspapers were. So his newspapers had been moved to the side next to this giant planter. So I'm sitting there at the table and I'm looking around and I'm like, wow, this is really different. If this looks different to me, it probably really looks different to the dog.
oh, yes.
So, and I realized that his papers had been moved and that they were, you'd think most animals might feel more comfortable going to the bathroom in like a corner or something, but he was used to going in the middle of this little space.
Oh,
So to
mm,
have something towering over him and being right by the wall as well, I think maybe was too much for him. So I said to her, what do you think? And she said, oh, well, we'll just move it back. So she, moved it back and moved a couple things out of the way. And as soon as she put the newspapers back where they always were with nothing next to them,
mm,
he ran over and peed on the papers.
oh, wow,
So, and he didn't end up
wow.
having a urinary tract infection. It was purely behavioral. And it just
Mm,
really made me realize, and since then too, I've seen a lot now, and anytime an animal's having an issue around December, it makes me think of, is there stress? Is the family
mhm,
putting up a lot of decorations? People's schedules are different. There's
mhm,
packages coming, and maybe they're
mhm,
putting, those are put near the animal or something like
mhm,
that. People are stressed, schedules are a little different. People are maybe gone later shopping or
mhm.
something like that. So I think, and that can affect animals. So it's always something I think about, especially during the holidays.
Wow. Well, you definitely have a lot of interesting stories in the book. I enjoyed reading it,
Thank you.
and I think other people will too. I can imagine, in the future, maybe writing maybe, are you thinking of writing, one for children?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. I am thinking about writing another book, but I hadn't really thought about one for children. That's an interesting idea. Thank you.
Yeah, because children like dogs. I mean, most children, not all, depending on where you're from. But, how does it feel to be a New York Times bestseller? What exactly what does that mean?
Oh, that was amazing, and it wasn't
Yeah.
really on my radar. It's a
Mhm.
whole sort of process, and a lot of it is very secretive. And what happened was on a Wednesday at about 5 o'clock, I got a phone call, and it was my editor.
Mhm.
And we don't speak on the phone very often, and if we do, it's usually an arranged call that we've
Right.
booked, a week or two before. When's good for you?
Mhm.
She doesn't just call me out of the blue typically. So I answered the phone and she was so excited. And she said, "You're not going to believe this." And the book hit the New York Times bestseller
Great.
list. And she said, all these background noises I'm hearing, like pings and dings and noises. And she said, that's everybody in the company, other people texting me and calling me, and there's my boss calling
Mm.
me. And she said, everybody is thrilled. And I didn't realize what a big deal it was for the team as well.
Mhm.
And how that happened, I think, is so it was the first week it came out that it hit the New York Times bestseller list. When you have pre-sales on a book, that all
Right.
counts towards the first week of sales.
Oh.
And what happened was my publicist, who actually got a promotion,
Oh.
my publicist got me on NPR's Fresh Air.
Oh.
And that aired the day before the book came out. So that aired, like books always release on a
Mhm.
Tuesday, which I didn't
Right.
know till I had a book coming out. And then the interview aired on the day before. So a lot of people were listening to my Fresh Air interview and then presumably went out and, ordered the book. And then that same week, one of the producers on CNN heard the Fresh Air
Oh.
interview and said that they wanted me to come on CNN.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was on CNN on the Saturday night that week for 4 minutes talking about my book. So I think all those things together were what ended me up on the New York Times bestseller list. And I think you never know for sure because it's some sort of secret formula from
Right, right, right.
I've read, but it was a very big deal, not just for me, but for my agent, for my editor, for the whole publishing team, to say that, they worked on a New York Times bestseller. So that was really, really exciting.
Wow. Well, the time is almost up. We do have your website. We'll post it for you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the time. I know you're very busy. Um, just to summarize, I'm very happy today that Karen Fine, doctor of veterinary medicine and author of The Other Family Doctor, appeared on my show on Miller Chat today. Thank you very much for coming. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I do have a lot of information on my website about pet loss and grief
Mhm.
resources, so feel free to check that out. And I've also written a guide to writing an obituary for your pet, which is something I feel is very helpful for me and many people I've recommended it to.
They wouldn't put that in a newspaper, would they?
Probably not, although I think it would be great, but a lot of people share it on social media.
Good idea.
It's just
I like that.
very, especially say you have a family and you're doing it with several people, everybody can really share. And it's really the focus is on the nicknames, the
Mhm.
mischief they got into, the fun stories, not, so it's sort of a celebration of life concept more
Mhm.
than just the sadness that you feel, the emptiness in the house. It's hard not to dwell on that. But if you're thinking about their life and the good times and sharing those memories with family and friends, that can be really a wonderful thing.
Mm. Well, thank you very much, Karen Fine, for coming on my show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for
Oh,
asking me.
thank you. And happy holidays and good night.